Welcome to the Manders Mindset podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am so excited to be joined today with Dr. Shannon Sauer-Zavala. And she is a clinical psychologist, professor, and best-selling author whose mission is to make evidence-based mental health strategies accessible for everyone. She's delivered keynotes at Cambridge University, TEDx, and ISSPD, and her work has been featured in Psychology Today, WebMD, and the Washington Post. And I am so excited to speak with her today and delve down her journey. Thank you so much for joining me, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. So that's a great bio, but who would you say Shannon is at the core?
Yeah, I guess I would say that I am a recovering overachiever perfectionist who is trying to, every day live my values, show up for my kids, show up for the work that's important to me. Yeah, I think that about it.
Gotcha. A recovering overachiever. I get that heavily. Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your upbringing, childhood dynamic, family dynamic, however deep you want to take that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Connecticut. I am an only child and grew up with my mom. My parents divorced when I was little and didn't really have much contact with my dad. And we moved in with my mom's parents, my grandparents, and kind of grew up like the four of us and pretty close, like extended family. I think, contrary to what my bio suggests, I was not a particularly conscientious kid. I was messy and lazy and shy. And I think that's part of what got me into like studying personality and personality change, and some of the treatment research that I do, because I've watched my personality change over time. It really wasn't until like mid college that I was sort of like, oh gosh, like I have a career in mind and I'm not going to be able to do it because I won't get into grad school because my grades aren't good, because I don't apply myself. And that was kind of a turning point for me to, once I sort of had a purpose, it was a lot easier for me to, buckle down and get things done. And I think the pendulum shifted kind of so far in the kind of perfectionistic overachiever. Sure, I'll take that on direction. That once I had kids, I'm now kind of actively trying to kind of come back the other way.
Now, what did you go to school for when you first went to college?
Yeah. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up taking an introduction to psychology course my freshman year, and it was at 8 a.m. 3 times a week. And even though I like habitually skipped all of my other classes, I showed up to each and every psychology class. And I ended up doing really well in the first exam, kind of like one of those rite of passage exams. And my TA was like, oh, Shannon, you should really consider majoring in psychology. And I was like, cool, okay. And that is kind of like what got it started. So I was a psychology major.
Okay. And I'm curious, you mentioned you had this like realization where you realized you kind of had to shift your ways a little bit. Like, was that a drastic realization? Did stuff start changing for you like right after that?
Yeah, I think it was like pretty gradual, right? So one of the things that, I talk about with my clients that I saw in my own life is, are really principles of reinforcement. And so doing well on that first psychology exam, that was reinforcing. And so I kept applying myself in that class and took more psychology classes and kind of like shaped my identity a little bit, like, oh, like I'm good at psychology. And And so in my psychology classes, I was doing really well and was being rewarded for it and, really kind of staying the course, but not so much in my other classes. And because I was kind of like feeling myself as a psychology student, and also like I do think a strength of mine is being really empathetic and like people oriented. And so I sort of decided, okay, like I think I want to go to graduate school. I want to be a clinical psychologist, right? And anyone that's ever tried to go to graduate school for clinical psychology, it's like super duper competitive. And certainly if I was trying to get in now, I would not have. But I got some feedback from a professor that was like, yeah, your overall GPA is not competitive. And so that for me, negative emotions, right? Guilt, frustration, they can also be really motivating because you're motivated to decrease them. And so that's when I really started to see more across the board change.
How was grad school?
Grad school was great. I think I was taking only classes that I was really, really interested in. I think it really trained me up to be more and more conscientious. For the first time, I had a planner. Was this will age me a little bit, but when I was in grad school, like Gmail was in like beta, so I had my Gmail and my Google calendars, and I think like using these like organizational tools, again, it's sort of that negative reinforcement. It took away the overwhelm of, oh, I have to go to the clinic and see some clients. Oh, I have class. Oh, I have to write these research papers. And so I think I developed strategies that really helped me to be successful there.
That's awesome. So post grad school, what was the next step for you from there?
Yeah. So when you get a PhD in clinical psychology, you have to do like a 1-year clinical residency. So I'm in Kentucky now. My professor job is at the same place I went to grad school. My mentor from grad school retired and I ended up applying for her job. But so when I left Kentucky, where I did my grad school, went to Duke, that's where I did my pre-doctoral internships, kind of like a residency, and then moved to Boston and had my first faculty job at Boston University.
That's awesome. And so you get your first faculty job and then from there.
Yeah. So at BU, I was studying treatment research, and that's really the first time I'd ever done treatment outcome research. And that's where I think I really found what I wanted to do. Because, at the same time as you're doing the science, you're still working one-on-one with patients. And I loved that. And I think I was really drawn to research and treatment research in particular because one-on-one clinical work is so beneficial to that one person that you're working with. But if you can develop a treatment that's more efficient, that's more accessible, that fits better with how clinicians in actual practice do things, then that's what's going to move the needle. And so I really felt like this was the way to do the most good.
And did you notice that you were doing good? Did you feel like you were?
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of professional success. I was able to get funding from the National Institute of Mental Health. So that, it's all these sort of like rewarding things that are telling me, oh, you're on the right path. You're doing the right thing. And, you have sort of that like long-term research is sort of a slow process. And then at the same time, you're working with people who are getting better and thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this care. So I really did feel like I was making a difference.
How long ago was this about?
Yeah. So we lived in Boston and I was at BU from 2011 to 2019. And then summer, or I guess May of 2019, we moved back to Kentucky. And so I've been at UK since then.
UK? And that
University of Kentucky.
How do you like UK compared to BU?
I like it a lot. I think you're from New England, so I don't know, maybe, and I'm from Connecticut originally, so I can definitely say this, but I feel like at BU, it was sort of this like, felt like you had to know somebody, you had to pay your dues, there was like a much more defined hierarchy. And I feel like in Kentucky, it's like a sort of a more level playing field. Like I don't have to ask a male colleague to order something for me because I'm not being taken seriously by staff. which in fact did happen at BU. So I think those things I really like. Plus, like I have, at the time that we moved, I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it's really hard to have little kids in like ground zero for the most expensive childcare with no family support. And so here in Kentucky, we have my husband's parents and my mom, since I'm an only child, my mom moved down here. So we have like childcare, and it's like an easier vibe.
That makes a lot of sense. And now, when you started working, when you were down in Kentucky, how was the work compared to?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I think like when I was at Boston University, I was sort of part of a bigger team. And then coming to University of Kentucky, I was kind of starting my own lab. And so I had a lot of autonomy. And that was something that was really important to me at that phase in my career. I felt like I was sort of ready to do my own stuff. And, working, I had a postdoc and I had graduate students, and I felt like it, especially early on in getting here, I felt like this surge of creativity. And we ended up developing a new treatment for borderline personality disorder that we actually just submitted it to the publisher last month, and it'll be published next year. Really excited about that. And we tested it in a big clinical trial. So it's been great.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I love that. Now, I want to transition a tad. You had mentioned about redefining what you believe success to be. I'm curious if you could tell me like what you used to consider it to be a little bit and how that's evolved.
Yeah. So and I think most people that think that they're going to go to school in the mental health field, you get into this field because you want to do good, you want to help people, right? But I think that when you are in academics, there are other pressures that are important if you want to like get promoted, get tenure, all of these things. And they are things that actually, like, when I look back, don't really matter that much, right? So how many peer-reviewed articles or publications do you have? How many grant dollars do you have? And those are things that on paper look really good. You can spend a lot of time writing and applying for grants and doing all of these things that are going to look good to like 17 other crusty old academics. And over time, I think I started to feel like it was a lot of busyness and a lot of work, and not really feeling like I was as close to the people that I wanted to help, and that I was trying to impress other more senior academics, and kind of realizing like that's not like if I'm going to be away from my kids and my family at work, that's not what I want to be working toward.
I get that. So, what would you say you consider success to be now?
So I think for me, success is being able, like having the space and the flexibility to be able to live in line with your values. And when I think about my values, what's important to me, it's my relationships with my partner and with my kids, like first and foremost, followed by like friends and family, and my health, right? My health, because, if I'm not taking care of myself, then I can't do any of the other things that I want. And then career, right? And I think like early in my career is like sort of career first. And oh my gosh, this is so important. And making a big deal out of things that, you know, 10 years later, I don't even remember, but I know I was real freaked out about it at the time. And so being able to, I think success to me is being able to do work that I think is meaningful. I mean, I know that this doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me, like I felt like I had to end every workday having answered every email in my inbox. And that is like, as you get more and more successful and more people are emailing you, that's like not a realistic goal. But I would be really stressed out if I couldn't. And I have had to, and still do sometimes, have to remind myself, I didn't get into this career to answer emails. I got into this career because I wanted to write, because I wanted to like do stuff like this, right? So being on this podcast is in line with my values because I want to communicate more directly to people that my research is relevant for. And these are the types of things that, feel like a meaningful use of my expertise. And so that's kind of where I wanted to be with work, and also feeling like if I want to leave in the middle of the day and go to my kids' school and have lunch with them, I can.
Were you not able to do that before? Like leave in the middle of the day?
I mean, when you have an academic job, it's flexible. So if you're not teaching a class, like I could have, I just didn't feel like I could, because I'll get
Mm.
behind, right? Like, because if I don't say yes to this opportunity, then people will think less of me. Or worse, it'll go to somebody else and then I'll lose my edge, right? And what I have actually found, and what has been like actually really surprising to me, is that when I started saying no more and pulling back and really saving my energy for the things that are important to me, I've actually gotten more opportunities, better aligned opportunities, right? Like, I don't think that if I was still saying yes to every request or opportunity that came through, that I would have had the time to really innovate in my treatment development. I wouldn't have this book coming out, I don't think, and so I'd rather, for me, knowing that I'm not trying to live up to anybody else's standards, that I have my own values and standards and I'm living in line with them.
That makes so much sense. Somebody said to me once, by saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And
Yeah.
you might not know in the moment, like what you're saying no to, but the yes that you were saying to whatever it is, and it doesn't even have to be a big thing, like writing a book. It could be something small, like going to dinner with some friends. That yes, it's going to be a no to something else. I thought of that when you were mentioning that.
I mean, I think that that's absolutely true, because time is really our most precious resource. And I think that's really was kind of a reset for me as well when I think about success, right? Like, being really protective of my time.
It's so true. Now, you mentioned you're writing a book. What's the name of the book? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So I have a book that's coming out in the spring. It's called BPD Compass. So Borderline Personality Disorder Compass. And Compass is kind of an acronym for cognitive behavioral modules for personality symptoms. And so essentially, there's this new sort of way that we think about personality disorder. So instead of a collection of symptoms, we think about it as like vulnerabilities in personality traits. And so people with BPD tend to feel their emotions really strongly. They tend to have difficulty trusting other people, and they tend to be kind of impulsive. And so instead of kind of playing whack-a-mole with the different symptoms, we're really targeting these personality features that put a person at risk for BPD.
Wow, personality features that put them at risk. That's such a cool way to like even phrase that. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, you said we. Are you like co-authoring the book?
Yeah, yeah. My postdoc at the time, a graduate student, and two graduate students wrote this manual, this workbook. And at first, we weren't thinking we would publish it. We were writing kind of a protocol that we would use in a clinical trial. And so we tested the treatment with, at this point, I think we've treated 150 people with borderline personality disorder over the past 5 years. And I mean, we see really striking effects. So our treatment is short. It is 18 sessions. And, kind of the standard treatment for borderline personality disorder is a year of twice weekly treatment. And we see improvement in 18 sessions that's comparable to the improvement that on average they see in the year-long treatments. And so, people are getting better just as much faster. And so that's where we really wanted to disseminate it. And so what will come out is like a self-help patient workbook. So if you don't have a therapist, you can read how to do it.
Wow. I love that. No, that's so awesome. A lot of people talk about the benefits of therapy, and there are, but depending on somebody's resources, like even financial resources, like just the way of the world today. Like, I love that. So like if they didn't have access to that, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping, I mean, this is like a long way off, but I'm hoping to kind of develop an online, kind of like an online course of it as well that will have like pre-recorded videos of me talking, like basically what I would say to a patient if I was one-on-one. Like you wouldn't get the back and forth, but I think it would like come alive a little bit more and like have the book as kind of the companion. For this very reason that it's really hard for people to find good evidence-based treatment. And then if you have a condition that not a lot of people are trained in, like BPD, it's even harder.
Now, I'm curious, did you always think of how that you would get into this area of psychology?
Yeah. So before I went to grad school, so I actually took a year off between undergrad and grad school because I did not get in the first time and I had to reapply. And I ended up working at a residential treatment facility that had basically people that were the same age as me, like young adults, but that were in a very different life state than me. And a lot of them had BPD. And I think that's where I got really interested in this condition because I worked with people that, like, in my estimation, were really cool and smart and creative and were just had a lot of difficulty regulating their emotions and really trying to figure out, like, how, like, where did these trajectories, where did they diverge? And so when I went to graduate school, like, I've always been interested in BPD, and that's really, like, where I did my master's thesis and my dissertation, but it was more on, like, understanding the condition. And so, early on, I didn't think, "Oh gosh, like, I'll write a new treatment for BPD and it'll be a published book and I'll travel all over the world and train therapists to do it." No, I did not think that. But I think it kind of became this natural evolution of then, for my postdoc training in my early career, doing this treatment research and learning how to do that. That when I came back to UK and was kind of in charge of what I wanted to study, that I would come back to BPD and I'd kind of merge that with the treatment training.
I get that you probably didn't see it being this full
You're right.
of that far back, but that makes a lot of sense, and that's cool that it kind of came full circle for you. Like you got to have that experience, and you realized they're just people that have trouble regulating their emotions. Society generally, they think people with BD, it's much more than that. I like how you simply put it, like they just struggle regulating their emotions.
Yeah, they struggle with trust and interpersonal relationships because, a lot of them have had like not great relationship experiences. And one thing that's just worth saying, since I have a platform to say it right now, is that BPD is really, really responsive to treatment and it just gets better over time. We have really good, like 25-year-long longitudinal studies tracking people that were hospitalized at McLean Hospital, which is right outside of Boston, for risk and were diagnosed with BPD and they followed them for 25 years. And I mean, I want to say like 85% no longer meet criteria for BPD. And they didn't after like 5 years. And that's with or without treatment. And then with treatment, like the prognosis is really good. So I think the field and like just people in general used to think that this was a treatment or this was a problem that couldn't be treated. And that just like the data don't support that at all.
Wow. Now, I'm curious, what did the treatment look like a little bit for this?
Yeah. So my favorite part of the treatment comes right at the beginning. And this is a little bit full circle because we were talking about my values earlier, but we start with values. I think people with BPD is so refreshing because, sometimes they've been validated by their therapists that they've had before. They're like, that's crazy. Why are you doing that? And really talking about some of the problems that they have. And so we start with values. And so, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know what values mean, it's basically just your aspirational life direction. So it's how you want to show up in your relationships, in your career, in personal growth, in health, in these different domains of life that people tend to care about, what you want to be about, how you want to show up. And importantly, values they're not goals. You don't check them off. You don't say, I want to be, my value is to be honest in relationships and be honest with your partner one time and be like, check, cool, I did it. It's like in the same way that you can travel west and never arrive at west. That's like kind of how it works with values. And so we really go through and define people's values, as a parent, as a partner, as a adult child towards their family of origin, as a friend, as a worker, as a learner. And we use that. So that's kind of like the first real session. And then the next session, we do something called, we have this worksheet called Becoming a Values Pro. And PRO is an acronym for Prompt Response Outcome. And so basically, we're getting people to track their relationship difficulties, any emotions that came up, any triggers for impulses that they had during the week, and kind of write down, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what did you do? So kind of get that monitoring down. And then most importantly, for outcome, that last piece, we ask them, why'd you do this in the short term? Like, what did you get out of it? People don't do things for no reason. Often it's because it made me feel better right now. That's why I snapped at my partner, or that's why I cut myself, or that's why I drank, right? Made me feel better right now. And then the key question that we ask is, okay, does that take you closer or farther away from your values? Because as a therapist, I don't want to be in a position of telling you, ooh, don't do that, right? I want you, because my values and what I think is normative might be different than what you think, and that's fine with me. I want you to decide, okay, like, does that align with my values or not? And I don't know what we were thinking when we wrote the treatment, but I don't think I realized how much this would resonate with people. And throughout the whole rest of the treatment, as they're learning skills, they will say things like, people will spontaneously say things like, and it just wasn't in line with my values. Or it was really hard, but it was in line with my values, so I did it anyway. And that feels, just as a therapist, really, really powerful and like empowering to the folks that you're working with. And that's kind of the beginning part. And then the rest of it is like pretty straight CBT. So we have cognitive flexibility. So kind of changing your perspective, particularly about emotions in relationships and towards impulses with behavior change. And so that basically just looks like testing out new behaviors and seeing what you learn. If you ask people for help, do they help you? So you're kind of rewriting beliefs that you have about what you can expect from other people. And then we have mindfulness. So learning to really pay attention non-judgmentally toward the present moment. And that's pretty much it.
I love that. It seems like you're really helping give them their power back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been so great.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's so cool that this came full circle for you, like, because you were working with them before. Wow. That's awesome. That's so awesome. Now, I'm curious. I want to kind of transition a tad, but I'm curious about, you mentioned about it's possible to add fulfillment without adding more to your plate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is like, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, like this really is also values are the answer. And so the idea isn't necessarily to do more, it's to do more of the right things, right? And what's right for me versus you versus anybody listening is going to be different. It really has to do with what's important to you and what you value, not, what your boss thinks or society or your mother-in-law or your partner or your kids. It, really taking the time to understand what I want my life to be about. Then it becomes, when somebody asks you to do something, the question is not, do I have time? It's, does this take me closer or farther away from the person that I want to be? Or, like in your phrasing, right? If I say yes to this, what's the cost? What does it take away from? And it becomes this very clear compass. So it's really doing the same thing that we do with, with clinical patients. This is why clinical patients aren't really, there's just a continuum. They aren't really different or other, because it's the same strategy. It's like, is it in line with my values or not?
I get that. Is it aligned with my values or not? And does it help me be the person I'm trying to be?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like a lot of people want to skip that step, that like introspection, the time that it takes because they just want to start making changes. But it really if you don't spend the time to get clarity on why you are doing things, like how'd you get to this point? Like, why are you doing things the way that you're doing them? Like, what is the reinforcement, and for me, right, as like a high achieving woman, the reinforcement, gold stars, pats on the back, right? Like feeling like if I didn't, and like never saying no, right? So no was scary because I didn't know what would happen because I never said it. Right. So kind of taking the time to understand how you got there and then taking the time to figure out where you're going, you can't really skip that step. Otherwise, you kind of will just be spinning your wheels.
That makes so much sense. No, that makes so much sense. Now, I'm curious. I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this, but like, if you have advice or suggestions for people who are struggling with burnout and maybe because they're saying yes to things that they don't necessarily want to, or maybe it would be better for them not to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think a couple things happen when people are struggling with burnout. One of those things, so two things that people kind of mistakes people make in their mindset. One, they think that burnout is an efficiency or productivity problem. So they think, if I could just be more efficient, if I could find the right planner or the right, phone app locker or the right time management system, that I will, that everything will fall into place and I'll be able to do it all with time, with time left to spare. And you're already efficient. You're just doing too much, right? Like there just literally aren't enough hours in the day. And, because people that often get to the point of burnout are, overcommitting anyway, who's to say that if you were to get more efficient and free up time, that you wouldn't just fill it with other stuff, So that's kind of the first mistake that I see a lot of women making. And then the second one is like kind of thinking because your peers are all burnt out too, that's just like what it means to be a woman with a career and a family and all the stuff that we do, right? So I always use the example of like in the group chat, right? We're all venting about how exhausted we are. And that like venting is something that feels super good in the moment. Yeah, they get me, they understand. But it backfires in the long term because that short-term relief feels satisfying. So we don't actually do anything to change the problem. And we believe that this is just like the cost of success. We're all here. Everyone's doing it. So those are the two like kind of things that I see people trying that I don't think, that don't end up long-term solving the problem. And so once you get clear on your values and you're like, ooh, I should be saying no to that. I don't want to do that. I'm already burnt out. Then I think that's where cognitive behavioral techniques become really important, right? This is like a step that I think of as like gaining confidence in your ability to set boundaries. Because number one, there's a lot of fear. And so one of the things that I do when I work with people is ask them, what are you afraid is going to happen if you were to say no? Or if you were to cut back, or if you were to close your laptop at 5 o'clock and not open it until tomorrow morning, or you were to leave work with stuff still left on your desk, like, or you send an email with a typo, whatever the person's big fear is, right? Like, what are you afraid is going to happen? And then teaching them really systematic ways to kind of evaluate, well, how likely actually is that? And if you did send an email with a typo because you didn't check it over 4 times before you sent it, how bad would that actually be, right? So really doing this cognitive work. The other thing, and you really can't get around it, and it sucks, is that you have to change your behavior. You just do. You have to say no so that you can see what happens. In my experience with my clients, it's nothing. Like, it's so anticlimactic, especially for like high achieving, burnt out people. One of the behavior change things that I try to get people to do is do 80% of your best job. Just give it your best, your good old 80% instead of like your, my 110%. And honestly, like no one notices because your 80% is most people's, 110%. So you're still performing at a high level just without the overwhelm. And so regardless of how you choose to change your behavior, whether it's to set a boundary and say no, whether it's to ask for help and delegate, whether it's to just like put less effort into something that doesn't matter that much, you will then, by doing that, you'll get data, right? Data on like what happens next. And usually the feared outcome, the thing that you were worried about, it doesn't happen. And so then you get more confidence the next time you set a boundary and you keep that going.
I really like that question. What are you worried is going to happen? Even if it's not for saying no, even if it's for something else that you're afraid to do, whatever it is, what are you worried is going to happen? Because I think a lot of us overthink of what could, yeah, literally, that is a really powerful reframe. I like that. Now, I'm curious, do you have any suggestions for people to get clearer on what their values are?
This is like a really common psychological tool if you go to therapy. But, because it's a really like known tool, if you just Google values identification, you'll get tons of hits, tons of therapy worksheets. And you don't really need a therapist to do this. Like you can easily find online something that can walk you through it. But essentially what it is making a list of life domains. So if people want to want to pause and get like a pen and a paper, they are let's see if I can name them all. Family of origin, like how you want to show up in those relationships, intimate partnerships, parenting, friendships, personal growth. So like lifelong, like how you want to be as a lifelong learner, career, citizenship. So how you want to show up like in your community or, your country or the world, right? Like global citizen, spirituality, health and wellness, cultural traditions, and leisure. So those are the 11 different domains. And then basically like I just asked that question, right? Who do you want to be? What do you value? In the BPD compass treatment, we give people this word bank of like 100 different value-y words like honesty, dependability, genuineness. And we kind of use that as brainstorming. So, if I'm thinking about like my parenting values, right? Like presence and trust and humor and joy, right? I'd pick a couple of those. And then I would try to figure out, okay, like why did those words stick out to me? And then I turn it into one sentence, right? Which is just like, okay, so I want to be a parent who carves out dedicated, present time for my kids, but doesn't completely lose my identity in the process of parenting, right? So like one sentence. And then you ask yourself, okay, if I were living in line with that value, what would that like literally look like behaviorally? What would I be doing more of? I would probably, when I'm answering my emails and my kid is like, watch me do this thing, instead of being like, okay, in a minute, I will just stop and watch for 2 seconds while they jump on one foot or whatever it is, right? Like, because that's in line with my value. What would I be doing less of? I'd probably work less on the weekends, even for things that I find meaningful, right? I would be off my computer when we're watching a movie together, doing things. And so it really is taking something that feels big, like value, parenting values, and turning it into behaviors.
Turning it into behaviors. You made that very simplified. I appreciate that.
Well, good. I'll take the praise. I've been doing this for a long time, so I'd be worried if I if I couldn't articulate it.
I think like no matter who is listening to us, that is very simple to switch it, because I feel like values in you Google that identifier, you're going to get so many different options. But I think that was really simple to just toning it into behavior. Like, how would you act? How would you show up for this?
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. I'm curious about, we've talked about changing behaviors and shifting that aspect. How do you suggest people go about approaching change, like changing their behavior, changing something about themselves?
Yeah. I mean, certainly like the first step is compassion. A lot of people think that, if you beat yourself up for behaving a certain way or making a mistake or having certain emotions in response to something, that you'll like beat yourself into submission and you won't anymore. And I mean, tons of clinical experience and research data suggest that that really isn't the case. And so the better approach is kind of taking this compassionate lens where you are trying to understand why you made the decision that you made. And, maybe that's not what you would strive to do next time. And so you can kind of look at it with this desire to change without beating yourself up for where you're coming from. That's like the first place. Because, when you feel like crap, you're not, because you've beaten yourself up, you're not going to be motivated to do anything, right? It's a lot harder to make those changes. So that's the first piece. And then I think the second piece is, these are things that don't need to be done overnight. And a lot of times what I see with people is that, and sometimes with myself too, it's like, okay, it's like all or nothing. So like, I'm going to cook healthy and I'm going to walk 5 miles and I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. And then when I drop one of those balls, all the balls drop. Right. And so it's like figuring out what is most important, right? Again, values, like where do you want to start? And then making small changes and waiting until they stick. I think those are really important. I also think, and obviously I'm biased, but I think therapy is really awesome. And it can be really helpful to, like, therapy isn't just for like, I'm straight up in crisis. Therapy can be proactive. It can be aspirational, right? Like we can have support because change, it's hard. Even if you're going from good to better, it's still hard.
No, that's so true. That's so true. I love how you mentioned though about compassion and about like not beating ourselves up. I think there's a lot of culture nowadays that is like that hustle culture and like beating ourselves up a little bit and that all or nothing, like, like you're either on or you're off. And it's like, sometimes it's even back to you mentioned before, like about the 80%, like why does it have to be 0 or 100, like
Like burnt out, exhausted, collapsed, or like just straight up killing it on all fronts.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. Now, I'm curious, you mentioned therapy, and do you have suggestions for people for finding the right therapist for them?
Yeah. Yeah. This is like, certainly a loaded issue. There's lots of different types of therapy. And depending on what your problem is, certain therapies are going to be more or less appropriate. So, the most common thing that people get is what I refer to as supportive therapy, right? And it's essentially just, kind of coming in, your therapist will say, how was your week? And they'll sort of like validate you and give you some tips and help you kind of work through or think through some of the things that are going on in your life. And for many people that maybe don't have a great listening ear in their life, or, they're just trying to they just need a sounding board, that's great. I mean, that's probably the appropriate form of therapy. However, if you have well, I'll start with anxiety disorders. Like if you have anxiety disorder, if you have generalized anxiety, which is like uncontrollable worry, if you have panic disorder, panic attacks, social anxiety, OCD, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, major depressive disorder. Now I'm just like you have an eating disorder. It's like really important to get evidence-based care. And evidence-based care simply means that it's been tested in a clinical trial and we know that it works. That's really important. And so for anxiety disorders, depression, eating disorders, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is the frontline treatment even before medication. Super effective. We can treat people that have had panic attacks for 10 years in 7 sessions. That's how effective it is if you get the right treatment for the problem that you have. And so if you go on psychologytoday.com, for instance, which is where a lot of people look for therapists, almost every therapist will say, oh, I do CBT. And that isn't really true. And so usually I will kind of coach people that I'm working with to ask some questions, right? So do you follow a manualized protocol? Do you use worksheets? Do you give homework? How do you help people with difficult thoughts? Do you encourage people to change their behaviors? Like these are the types of questions, because what you really want if you have like a condition like I'm describing is somebody that's going to push you to make difficult changes. And so that's really important. I will say too, like, this is a lot of information I feel like I'm giving. abct.org. And gosh, what is the name of the OCD one? Well, I'll just say OCD. abct.org it's my professional association, and it's where like tried and true CBT therapists, they have their professional listings. So it's like a little bit more vetted.
That makes a lot of sense to ask the questions, though. That's interesting to me that they list that they do CBT, but they don't.
Yeah. And they probably do it to like an extent, like, oh, could you think about that differently or something, but they're not necessarily teaching it in the structured way that somebody that's been really well trained would.
That makes
I think
sense.
people are trying to be disingenuous on purpose. Is like
N-
more.
No, I get it, but it's all in asking the right questions, because it's different when you're getting even like these worksheets and these things that you have talked about. I'm sure is very different than if you're not having that homework.
Right. I mean, 50 minutes a week, and I say this as a therapist, 50 minutes a week is not going to do anything unless you are making the changes out in your actual life.
Now, I'm curious. I ask a lot of guests this, and I'm sure you've had many because most have. But I'm curious what you would consider the biggest aha moment you've had in your life. Or one of the biggest.
Oh gosh. Biggest um oh. um I think for me, I mean, I've kind of already talked about it a little bit, but I think the biggest aha moment for me was that like academia is never going to love me back, right? It doesn't matter how hard I work. It doesn't matter like how many publications, if I have the most grant dollars, it like doesn't matter. Academia is a business, and I cannot determine my worth based on what, I don't know, echelons of academic power think is important, or, on these metrics that aren't meaningful to me. I think you define the scale that you measure yourself on. Don't let some crusty old dude do it.
I love that you define your own scale. No, I think that's so key for every aspect of life. Wow. No, that makes so much sense. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you. You asked like really such good questions. This was really awesome.
Thank you. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yeah.
So most
Man named Jay Shetty.
a lot of people have, but I either get the, oh my gosh, of course, or no, I have no idea. It's never like in between. He ends his podcast on purpose with 2 segments, and I've incorporated those into mine. So I give him credit because everybody's like, I love these questions. They're not mine. I did not come up with them at all. First segment is the many sides to us. And there's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each. What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Warm.
What is 1 word someone that knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Silly.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Hysterically funny. Funny.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would you use to describe you as?
Entitled.
What is 1 word that you're trying to embody right now?
Purpose.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in up to a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
This is anti-advice, but, I've heard people say, "You have the same 24 hours as Beyoncé." And that one always sticks in my head because I think that, no, you don't. Like, you don't have an entourage. So you don't have the same 24 hours as Beyoncé. You have to prioritize.
Okay. So why is that the best?
I think that it embodies the sort of comparison culture that we have. And just because other people are hustling in a particular way or have a certain level of productivity, that, well, if Beyonce can do it, like, why can't I? I'm just not working hard enough. And, you don't see all the behind the scenes and all the help that and all the money that she has that like makes that productivity, available to her. That wouldn't be, you can't measure yourself by the same standards.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Oh, I should have saved that one. Um, I think the worst advice I've received has been, hide your emotions, be professional, change the way that you talk so that you sound more professional. Those ones really bother me because I'm really proud of being, I don't know that I mentioned this before, but being a first generation college student, I'm really proud of the fact that, like, I talk like a person. I say, like, I have these sort of speech qualities. I like those things because they're me, and I like them because they show other people that are like me, that talk like me, that look like me, that have backgrounds like mine, that it's possible to be successful and to still be yourself. And I take that really seriously as an educator, right? So in my professor role that I haven't talked that much about, like getting in the classroom in Kentucky, it's a really rural state. People are coming to the University of Kentucky from really rural places. Many are the first people in their families to go to college. And so I think not sounding making having it be clear that, like, there isn't a way a professor sounds is really important to me.
I get that. What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Inbox zero.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
Shannon was creative and thought outside the box in terms of solving big problems.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I
Mm.
want to know why.
That feels like a really big responsibility in these times. I guess I would want, I don't know, any law. I mean, there's so many things that I think could be different, but I think I'm gonna go with passing universal health care, like socialized health, because I don't think that you should have to have good insurance or be rich to get the very best care available. And right now, I think there really is, whether we want to admit it or not in this country, the care that you can get is really stratified by what you can afford.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I did too. This was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And where is the best place for listeners to connect with you?
Yeah. So probably my website. It is www.personality-compass.com. And I can send it to you, Amanda, so that if you have show notes, you can link to it.
Yeah, I will put that in the show notes. Absolutely. And I do just like to give it back to the guest. No pressure, but any final words of wisdom, anything else you want to share with the listeners before we close out?
Yeah. I think, you know, change is hard and change is scary, but you really are in the driver's seat of the person that you want to be. And it may seem like that's impossible, but I mean, I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in, hundreds of clients, whether they are, trying to recover from serious mental illness, or they just want to, kind of nudge their people pleasing and their perfectionism down a notch, right? And so it's possible for you too.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate this.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.